we have to understand the process of threat assessment in NATO as a consensual process. I mean, as you know, NATO is an alliance of 29 members, soon 30, and whatever, and consensus is at the very basis and very bedrock of the alliance. All allied decision-making is conducted unanimously, and all allies need to agree on any particular decision. Indeed, I mean, this was a decision by the Warsaw Summit, a decision related to deterrence and defense and NATO's activities in what we call the southern region, and how we got there. I mean, looking back to 2014, 2014 was another significant year in European security. Russia annexed Crimea and engaged in eastern Ukraine in conflict there, and at the same time ISIL emerged, not so much suddenly, but very strongly in the south, fueling into the turmoil we've been seeing in the Middle East for a number of years. So the whole notion of 360-degree implies that NATO should not look into one particular direction, be it east, south, but also north, by the way. It should be able to respond to all of those challenges that pose a threat to the alliance and its individual members. It shouldn't aspire to be a global policeman. The 360-degree doesn't span across the earth, but at the same time illustrates the versatility that with which we need to address these challenges. It also means that we need to be flexible in our military strategy and in our response and in our deterrence. Again, that shows on the map of Europe. It shows on the map of the alliance. There has been a lot of discussion about what this flexibility entails. But in other words, I mean, the decision of the Warsaw Summit was that NATO needs to be able to respond adequately, appropriately, and proportionally to challenges from wherever they may arise. So this would be sort of my initial answer to that, and I'm happy to come back to that in order to keep the flow as you indicated.
Marcin. Agnieszka, if I may, since you are rather expert from particular direction, that is Russia, how you perceive that 360-degree in context of Russian threat? That is, will you situate it as a, I don't know, primus inter pares, the problem of Russia, or rather not?
It means that for Russia, this is a chance, maybe an opportunity that one day, maybe not in a very close future, but in that mid-term perspective, NATO might become overstretched. And being overstretched for Russia, this is first of all two chances for becoming much more important for NATO, because NATO would be involved, for example, in, let's say, in stabilizing Middle East, North Africa. NATO might be involved into some problems with Chinese challenge, or NATO might be still involved in Afghanistan, and all these problems, they create the room for dealing with Russia and for Russia dealing and bargaining with NATO. And this is at the same time the opportunity for Russia to present itself not as a threat towards NATO, but as a partner, because Russia might pose some proposal. For example, let's have a look. We are your partners. If you would like to solve finally the problem of, I don't know, Afghanistan, the problem of international terrorism, the problem of arms race, we are the only one and the best partners for dealing, for compromising, and for bargaining. But the problem is, the only problem is the price and how Russia might benefit from this.
What has happened over the last 5 years in NATO and among the allies, 5 years, I mean, since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and started actually the war in the eastern Ukraine. What we have witnessed in NATO is a great overlap of the threat assessment. So basically the use of force and the forceful change of borders in Europe really rang a bell in a number of capitals which had very different threat perceptions as regards Russian foreign policy. And it really changed the approach to Russia. So I would say that when it comes to precisely the eastern flank, there is the broader understanding of what threat is, and it is shared. You can see it in the documents, in the statements of the NATO ministerial meetings, the North Atlantic Council meetings at the level of the ministers, and the statements of the summit, the declarations, the communications from Warsaw, from Wales. But it still doesn't mean that allies do not disagree, and they do disagree about responses. Basically, the, let's say, diagnosis is largely shared, but the recipe is not something what all allies would subscribe to, and this is the source of the normal, I would say, natural for all allies bargaining within the alliance. So basically Poland, a number of states in the eastern flank, says that we need to go further with the adaptation. So we need more robust military presence in the eastern flank. We need to change the, let's say, capacity of NATO to plan and conduct a defensive operation in the eastern flank, so the Article 5 operation. Some other allies say that, okay, the threat from Russia is at a certain level, but we have done enough, and we should, and the decisions which were made in Warsaw, in Brussels last year, I'm speaking about NATO summits, are enough, we just need to implement it. The same applies to the south, because I think that we should not speak, you ask about, Marek, about the 360 degrees and the threat perception. It is, of course, a number of threats of different characters, so the political, military, asymmetric, non-military come into this threat perception, and not only kinds of threats, but also geographical direction. So we need to remember that for a number of allies, the legitimate threat is also, let's say, the effects of the unregulated, unmanaged migration flow. So basically we speak about the countries from the southern flank. And this is as legitimate threat perception as the threat perception of Poland or the Baltic states. There is, thankfully, a large understanding of what the threats are. So the diagnosis is largely shared. If not, we wouldn't have all the adaptation with all the achievements of the adaptation, of the changes which NATO has been undergoing for the last 5 years.
You know, we shouldn't be thinking of NATO's threat assessment as a process of continuous disputes. On the contrary, I mean, as Marcin mentioned, all these declarations, I mean, the consensus is very strong. And yes, allies sometimes have different opinions, but looking through the entire history of the alliance, going as early as the 1950s, you can see a series of disagreements, some more serious, some less serious, but that's the beauty of the alliance. And I should also say that despite its military part of the alliance, it's also a political alliance. I mean, the gist of the allies being together is also so not that they only can defend one another, but they also have a platform where they can talk and do political consultations, where America and Europe sit together at one table. This is quite unique about the alliance.
The problem indeed is that if we, I have to say that in my assessment, it is a problem that the burden sharing issue has been reduced to a very simplistic way of checking if the country is spending 2% of its GDP on defense or not. This is one of the indicators which was agreed on a political level by the allies some years before. It was repeated and strengthened in Wales in 2014 during the summit in Wales, but it does not tell you almost anything about the efficiency of the military, about how much a nation is contributing to allied operations and mission, how much nation is contributing to NATO command structures, all of the command agencies, headquarters, and all the agencies which make NATO military structure work. In this sense, it is too simplistic, and it may really hurt the allies which are very effective, but for this or that reason are not able to spend 2% on defense. On the other hand, however, if you are chronically around 1% and you are a big economy, it will inevitably mean that your military is weak, because at some levels it is simply not enough money to modernize your military.
It's like a family, isn't it? People put in, partners put in complicated inputs of different kinds of things, some of which are money. But I think it is true that it's going to be very difficult for the alliance to work harmoniously if the American public is continually told that they're spending 3 to 4 times as a percentage more than the Europeans, who are arguably more threatened than they are. That's hard to sustain. But on the other hand, a lot of the money that America spends, it would be spending anyway on enabling capabilities as a global superpower. It would be buying satellites. It would be producing state-of-the-art drones and artificial intelligence. And in many ways, having allies increases American power, because it produces capabilities and bases and places and support that it doesn't have to pay for itself. So, like I say, you just can't compare percentages of GNP. And there is this thing called moral burden sharing. It's our countries willing to send troops to fight and maybe die for alliance purposes. And there's also in the nuclear field an idea of moral burden sharing. I know American officials who very much do not want their country just to be scripted in as NATO's nuclear executioner. This whole business of thermonuclear war, if it ever came to it, is so nasty that the spiritually advanced Europeans don't even want to discuss it. We'll leave that to the Americans to step in and do that if it happens. They hate that idea. They want to see active involvement by other allies in what is, after all, a hideous possibility that may be necessary to preserve the entire alliance. The attractiveness for NATO is obvious for countries that want to develop and improve their security and move forward in a kind of liberal, democratic, capitalist way. It has analogies to the advantages that the EU has in the economic field. If you get assistance in reforming and modernizing, you will find your country gets richer and will be safer and better protected, partly by training, advice, and diplomatic attention and sympathy. So it's a very powerful, attractive package which many countries want to take. And this, of course, creates pushback from Russia and maybe other countries beyond Russia, who, Iran, I imagine, may be similarly allergic to the spread of prosperous, well-defended Western values moving closer to their doorstep. We shouldn't pretend that that doesn't create negative reaction from states that feel threatened by that spread. But nonetheless, it's a very powerful, attractive thing. I read somewhere that the time of the end of communism, that Belarus and Poland were roughly comparable in living standards, and Poland is now 4 times better off and with more autonomy, better defended. That's a terrifying gravitational pull, isn't it? It's something we should be proud of, but it creates tensions by people who feel they might be torn apart by it.
If you remember, there were a few moments after 1991 when, at the very beginning, President Yeltsin was talking about why not one day, yes? And then it was even Putin in the moment when there was not a honeymoon between Russia and the West, but when the relations were much more, let's say, normalized, yes. And then happened what happened. It was Munich, and now we know the rest of the story. Frankly speaking, I might theoretically imagine Russia in NATO, but
just a partner.
Yeah, as a partner, maybe I was ready to imagine this during 90s, maybe at the beginning of 2000s. But nowadays, I think that the relations became too complex just to just turn back to the situation where Russia and NATO were partners, because, you know, Russia officially recognized NATO as a not only threat, but not only competitor, but a threat, not a challenge, but a threat. What's more, for Russia, NATO plays the role of the instrument, because due to which Russia might, not Russia, but President Putin might consolidate society around Kremlin, and the idea that that there are enemies abroad. Yes, much more seriously, Russia is treating Chinese threat and challenge, but officially this is the West, which is the #1 threat and challenge.